Hi, this is New York songwriter John Bucchino, and I'm talking with Rabbi Sol Solomon on Dave's Gone By, UNC Radio.
Shalom, hello, is this John Bucchino here?
It is indeed. Hello, Rabbi. How are you?
Shalom to you, John, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I just had a #1 album in Australia, so I'm very happy.
Wow. The only thing I know from Australia is ABBA, and, when I listen to their records backward, they're still ABBA. So that's about all the Australian music I know.
The ABBA's Swedish.
Oh boy. So I don't know any Australians.
Yeah, I don't think so. Well, I hope you have had or have a chance to listen to David Campbell, who is singing my songs on this CD, because he's extraordinary.
Oh boy. Well, you know what? Let's first introduce you to everybody. Let's tell everybody who I'm talking to here on the Dave's Gone By radio program of The Air. I am Rabbi Sol Solomon, the founder and spiritual leader of Temple Sons of Bitches in Great Neck, New York. And I'm thrilled to be talking to John Bucchino, and I'm glad I'm not mispronouncing that. It's got a double C and an H, which phonetically has to do with the K sound instead of the H sound.
That's right.
And actually, the way I'm going to pronounce it, since I'm Jewish, is John Bucchino. Can I call you that?
That's a first, but I like it.
Okay, Bucchino, a wonderful songwriter, a maven, a bocha. You're with us here. His latest project, one of them, is that his songs have been recorded by an Australian singer named David Campbell. The album, not a particularly creative title, David Campbell Sings John Bucchino, available from Social Family Records. And also, I think you can get it as an import on Amazon and other places, but it's mainly you can get it through iTunes. David Campbell Sings John Bucchino. Plus, he's won all these songwriting awards, the Johnny Mercer Award, the Jonathan Larson Award, the Fred Ebb Award. Pretty soon he'll win the Pharrell Award if there is one. His songs have been covered by the likes of Patti LuPone, Audra McDonald, Kristen Chenoweth, Judy Collins, Barbara Cook. What an amazing person we're talking to. He's even had a show on Broadway. So again, let us first officially now welcome Shalom John Bucchino.
Thank you so much, sir. It's my pleasure to be speaking with you.
This album that I just mentioned is #1 in Australia?
Not only is David Campbell singing all songs of mine, but I'm accompanying him on piano. And it is just piano and vocal. It's just the two of us. It was #1 on the jazz chart, which is interesting because it's not really jazz, but that's the category they put it in. And it went to #1, yeah. And I think it was #2 last week. You know, they move around. But for at least a week, it was #1.
Oh, mit Mazel. And let me tell you, it's been since last week since I had a #2. So I'm very envious of you, I must say this.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
I know, I have all these intestinal problems. But let me ask you a question, John Bucchino. You write for both theater and also, on some level, cabaret/pop.
Right.
What's the difference in writing a song for those two different styles?
Well, I started out writing songs, just writing things because I felt stuff. They just kind of bubbled out of me. I never really planned on writing for theater. That just happened. It wasn't my goal. I just write songs because I observe something, I think about something about life, or I have a relationship and some emotions come up and I write them out. It's sort of my journal, of songwriting. And many of the songs on this album, most of them, were not written for theater projects. It's only in the last probably 20 or less years that I've been writing for theater. And the difference is, obviously, when I'm writing my standalone songs, which can be done in cabarets or concerts, I'm writing from my own personal experience about my life or my observations. When I'm writing for theater, I'm writing characters' lives, and I'm writing, things that they would sing in the context of whatever musical I'm writing.
Well, what was the first musical that you got to work on, that you got to write?
Well, I moved to New York in 1992 because a few years earlier I had been contacted by a fellow named Stephen Schwartz.
The Stephen Schwartz, by the way. You might want to explain who this man is.
Stephen Schwartz, who is one of the most renowned musical musical theater writers. Earlier in his career, he wrote Godspell, he wrote Pippin, and more recently, he wrote a little show called Wicked that you might have heard of.
Might have heard of it, yes.
Yeah, and he contacted me because he had heard someone sing a song of mine and really liked it. And I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and he was coming out to L.A. for some work and asked if we could meet. So I didn't know musical theater at all. I didn't know his name. I didn't know who he was. All I knew was that some big famous guy wanted to meet me. So I was waiting tables at the time, and nobody was paying any attention to my songs. And we got together, and we sat around a piano at the house that he was staying at and played songs for each other. And I thought, he's very good, this Stephen Schwartz. And he liked, my stuff, and we became best friends, which we are to this day. So he was the first person that said, the reason, you're not making it in the pop world, which is what I was trying to do, and nobody was paying any attention. I think that there is an inherent theatrical element in what you write, and maybe you should try writing for musical theater. Well, I've thought about it, but I didn't really know anything about the medium and wasn't especially interested. But then, a couple of years later, I got a phone call from another fellow named Stephen Sondheim.
Oh, good. Wait a minute. Stephen Sondheim called you?
Yeah. And he had heard some songs of mine and said, we have to talk, and the next time you're in New York, you have to come to my house, and we have to talk. And the next time I was in New York, I did. I went over to Sondheim's, spent about 3 hours, a whole afternoon with him, talking about music, and he said the same thing. He said, your writing is really theatrical, and have you thought about writing for musical theater? And I thought, oh my God, I can't get arrested in Los Angeles, but here are the biggest names in musical theater saying I should come to New York and try writing for musical theater. Maybe I should do that.
Now it's funny that when you first met Stephen Schwartz, it was just like meeting a guy who was a professional. You weren't nervous or scared. It was, just a guy. And it turned out, oh, he's talented.
Right.
By the time you met...
When I met him, I didn't know his work.
Right, but I'm saying by the time you met Sondheim, at that point, were you versed enough in musical theater that you walked in, with your knees shaking? Or was it still like, oh, another person in musical theater wants to talk to me?
It was more like the latter, yeah. And increasingly, it's very funny. We got to be pretty good friends, Steve Sondheim and I. And during that period, he was incredibly supportive. I mean, he would send, in those days it was cassette tapes, he would send tapes to try to get me a record deal and give them out to his friends. When I moved to New York and I met this wonderful circle of friends, which included Liza Minnelli and Hal Prince, who's one of the biggest directors on Broadway, who directed many of Steve Sondheim's shows.
Yes, of course.
The first time I went to Hal and Judy Prince's holiday party. I'm just this little greenhorn from L.A. who doesn't know anything about New York or about theater. The party was at 7 o'clock, and I arrived right at 7 o'clock on the dot, and the door opens, and all of my friends, the younger generation, had not arrived, nor was Steve Sondheim even there, whom I knew. So I didn't know anybody. And in the room were Hal Prince, Joel Grey, Comden and Green, Phyllis Newman, probably Lauren Bacall.
Good Lord.
A fairly daunting room to enter into, and I didn't know a single person. And Judy Prince, Hal's wonderful wife, greeted me at the door, and I shyly said, I was a friend of their daughter, Daisy. And I said, well, I'm Daisy's friend, John Bucchino. And Judy squealed and threw her arms around me and said, I'm your biggest fan. Turns out Steve Sondheim had sent them one of my cassettes, and they loved it. So they already knew my music, and they welcomed me into that illustrious company.
Oh, my God.
It's just, I feel like New York, starting with that, really embraced me and my work, and it's just been an extraordinary 20 years living there.
Wow. There's so many questions just filling my head at the moment, but I have to ask the most offensive one, okay? Are you ready?
Yep.
Are you girding your loins? And you can answer or not answer, but I am not the first one to mention this. In fact, they even make a joke about it on 30 Rock. So I'm not alone in this. All right. Stephen Sondheim, wonderful person.
Wonderful person.
Tremendously helpful to so many playwrights and composers. You're a friend. Does he have the sex dungeon?
Oh, you know what?
What?
I have no idea. That was the farthest thing from anything that we ever talked about or that I had any dealings with. Our relationship was purely platonic and just based on...
Well, no, I don't mean even that he took you down there and did things to you. I'm saying maybe he said, when I bought this apartment, I didn't know it was used by Cardinal Richelieu or something. No.
I've heard that as well, and you know what? It's not something you ask somebody about. I don't.
All right, I'm just one,
I can't, I'm sorry, I can neither deny nor confirm that rumor. I have no idea.
If you ever asked to show the apartment with the Corcoran Group, we're just wondering. Now, the other question is, you know these people, you Hal Prince, Sondheim, Schwartz. It's interesting, have you ever collaborated with any of them? Certainly not a musical, but even a song or two.
Certainly not. I mean, look, Steve Sondheim doesn't need me to collaborate. No, none of them, neither of them need me to collaborate. But I collaborated with Stephen Schwartz on one song. He has released a couple of solo albums over the last couple of years, actually, about 10 years ago, probably. And I co-wrote a song with him. He gave me a lyric, and I wrote music to it. And it's just a little pop song, and it's nothing serious. It's fun. And I did collaborate with Hal Prince because, back to your first question, was the first musical that I wrote. When I moved to New York, I was timid, as you might imagine, about writing for the theater because I'd never done it before. And Hal Prince came on board as well. As soon as he heard my music, when his daughter Daisy, or actually he probably heard the tape that Steve Sondheim sent, he got wind of my music, and he and Judy came to a couple of shows that I did and stuff, and he also said, oh my God, you should be writing for theater. So I was worried because I thought, well, what if I try writing for theater and I'm not very good at it, and then all these illustrious people say, oh, you know what, we were wrong, you're terrible, don't ever do it again. So the thought of writing something for the theater was kind of daunting. So the first project I did was actually a series of short musicals called Urban Myths. Each one was based on an urban legend. So it only had one production in 1998 in Wichita, Kansas, and Stephen Schwartz's son, Scott, directed it.
Oh.
Amazing, who I've known since he was 12. And he's brilliant now. He's artistic director of his own theater company, and he's just amazing. But anyway, Hal loved those pieces and was putting together a triptych of 3 short musicals and asked if one of those pieces from Urban Myths would work as part of the triptych that he was putting together. And so we used...
Was that trio thing that had the musical about Balloon Guy?
That's exactly what it was. It was called 3. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And the middle piece, boy, you're knowledgeable. The middle piece was one that I wrote called Lavender Girl. And again, it was directed by Scott Schwartz, Stephen's son. So I've collaborated with Stephen on one song, and I've collaborated with Hal Prince on one portion of a show that he put together.
Now, the question is, you've been part of the New York musical theater community for 2 decades.
Right.
And in that time, you've had Urban Myths, you've had Lavender Girl, you've also had, and we will talk about the Catered Affair on Broadway. But seems like Broadway and musical theater hasn't been your only venue. Have you had a lot of disappointments over those years of things that you were working on that just never came to fruition?
Well, not a lot of disappointments, actually. I mean, I've been very, very lucky. There's so many writers who slave, all their lives and never have anything produced. Pretty much everything that I've worked on has had at least one production. And, I feel really fortunate. It hasn't been a lot of disappointment. There have been sort of partial disappointments, like DreamWorks hired me to write the music and lyrics for one of their animated films, which was called Joseph, King of Dreams. And it was slated, they always planned it to be a direct-to-video and not to be on movie theaters. But as it got started, we were about a third of the way done, and they were loving it so much that they thought, oh, maybe we should rethink this, and it can be released in movie theaters. So they showed some of the animation on a big screen to see if it was high enough quality to work, and unfortunately, it was not. So if that had been a major motion picture release instead of just a direct-to-DVD, that certainly would have changed my life. Interestingly, the lead character of Joseph was voiced, the speaking voice was Ben Affleck, but the singing voice was David Campbell.
Oh, my goodness. So did he sing with an Australian accent and talk with an American one?
Well, David can sing with an American.
With the regular... But...
I had met him a while before that, and I pitched him to DreamWorks to sing. And in fact, one of the songs from that movie, which is the song is called Better Than I, and you would probably like it. It sort of has a spiritual bent to it. Is on our new CD.
Oh, now let me ask you a question. Is it about the Joseph story from the Bible?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Did you have to close your ears and not listen to the Andrew Lloyd Webber, Tim Rice thing?
Now, that's one of the ways in which not knowing musical theater came in handy. I had never heard the Andrew Lloyd Webber, so I didn't have to not think about it because I didn't know it. Hi, this is New York songwriter John Bucchino, and I'm talking with Rabbi Sol Solomon on Dave's Gone By.
So, okay, you did the DreamWorks thing, and we played the song.
I said it was a disappointment because it didn't go bigger, and the other sort of theater disappointment was that Urban Mess, after the Wichita production, never had another production, didn't have a New York production or anything like that. And then the other disappointment was with the Catered affair, just that it didn't run longer, ran for almost 5 months, which is quite respectable. But you always hope that you're going to have a long-running Broadway show.
Did you think that it might have fared better if they kept it off Broadway? Because it's kind of a chamber musical about this little family in the 1950s.
Possibly, yeah. I don't know that it was quite big enough for Broadway, certainly what Broadway has become. And I've seen it in several, Catered Affair, the Broadway show, in several smaller venues. It works, I think it works better in a more intimate setting.
Oh, I would not be surprised.
Yeah, it's quite powerful. I've been really impressed, in fact, with how powerful it is. Because, when something doesn't last a long time, I was feeling like, oh, well, maybe it's just not very good and whatever. But then having seen it in these other venues, most notably the Porchlight Theater in Chicago did a brilliant production of it a couple of years ago that has been my favorite regional production. It made me feel renewed faith in the piece itself, so I hope it gets done. There was just a London production, actually.
Mazel. But let me also ask, when we're talking, by the way, to John Bucchino here on Dave's Gone By, you mentioned before that, well, why would Stephen Sondheim want to collaborate with me on a musical? Why would someone like Stephen Schwartz have to work with me? Yeah. But on the Catered Affair, you got to work with Harvey Fierstein. I mean, my goodness, how did that come about?
Well, but he's a book writer, he's not a songwriter, so I wrote all the songs, but he wrote the brilliant book, the adaptation of the story. The way that came about is one of the amazing things that happened when I moved to New York. It took a while, it took a few years for this to build, but I started to meet these astonishing, illustrious, wonderfully talented singers who started to sing my songs. And among them were, in fact, Barbara Cook and Andrea Marcovici, who's an extraordinary cabaret performer. I met Judy Collins, and she loved one particular song of mine called Sweet Dreams that David Campbell does as well.
Right.
Is on the new album.
And people should know also that Sweet Dreams is on your first album, Grateful, Songs of John Bucchino.
Well, that's what I'm building. Yeah. That's what I'm just about to say, is that there was a guy named Billy Rosenfield at RCA.
Jewish guy, I think. Is he?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny. I was saying to Dave when we were talking before you and I started talking that he said, "Are you Jewish?" And I said, "No, I'm Italian, but I've lived in New York for over 20 years. 90% of my friends are Jewish. So I feel like it's about as close as you can get."
Absolutely. But are you circumcised, by the way?
Too personal. Come on, man.
I ask the women too. It's a natural question to ask.
Italian, I was raised Catholic. Of course I am.
Oh, okay. So you might be an honorary Jew by the time this is over. We'll see.
Close to it. So anyway, so I was meeting all these singers. Billy had this budget to do a small CD, and he loved my stuff. And he said, if we were to do something together, what would you want it to be? And I thought about it, and I thought, Art Garfunkel had recorded a song of mine, and we got to be friends. And I thought, I know all these incredible singers. People aren't going to know my name, but if I can get all these big-name people to sing songs of mine on this CD, that'll be a really good way of bringing attention to my work. So before I called Billy back, I called Liza. I called Art Garfunkel. I called Judy Collins. Called Patti LuPone, who had just recorded 3 songs of mine on one of her, recordings. These were people that I'd gotten to know, and I called them all and said, would you be willing to sing on this compilation album of my songs with me accompanying you on piano? And every single one of them said yes. They didn't even ask about money. They would have done it for free, but for legal reasons, they had to get union scale, which I think was $200.
All right.
And we put together this CD called Grateful, the Songs of John Bucchino, which came out in 2000 with all of those amazing people singing songs of mine. So someone had given Harvey Fierstein a copy of that CD. And this was years later, but probably in 2003, and the album came out in 2000, so I think it was around 2003 that Harvey got the CD, and he sent me a fan letter. And I didn't know this guy. I knew his work, of course, and I was, it was very nice. And then about a month later, he sent me another fan letter saying, I'm obsessed with your music. And I thought, well, that's very nice. So I called our mutual friend, and I got Harvey's number, and I called him up and said, well, hi, and I'm such a fan of yours. Do you want to have dinner? And he said, actually, that would be good because I have a project I want to talk to you about. The project was a Catered affair, which had been a Paddy Chayefsky teleplay from the 1950s, and then it was turned into a Betty Davis movie with a screenplay by Gore Vidal.
Oh, my.
Harvey, so it had quite the pedigree. And
weird considering that he was sort of, wasn't he known as being a little anti-Semitic? Or was that just not really true?
No, I don't know much about Gore Vidal. Or are you talking about Gore Vidal or about Chayefsky?
No, Chayefsky was Jewish. He was not anti-Semitic.
I know.
Unless he hated himself. No, I meant Vidal.
There are self-hating people of all persuasions.
That's true.
But anyway, and Harvey had loved this project and had gotten the rights to it many years before, and had not been able to find somebody, the right person, the right music. I think he asked Kander and Ebb, and they had done something similar, and so they didn't want to do it. He'd asked Jerry Herman, who wasn't well, and so he couldn't embark on it. Before me, he asked Billy Joel, strangely enough. Had it for maybe a year, and didn't come up with anything, because he's not a theater writer, and it's a very different skill. So he asked me if I would do it. And I said no.
Oh.
Because I was terrified. And I hadn't yet written a full book musical. The thought of working with somebody who had like 4 Tony Awards and was very famous, again, terrified me. But eventually he talked me into it, and we started work in 2004. Harvey wrote the script, and then I wrote the songs. 2008, it went to Broadway. Amazingly enough.
So the collaborating with Harvey, I mean, what was that like? Was he really funny? Was he really serious?
Yeah. Well, he's a much more serious guy. I mean, yes, of course, he's always funny, but he's a much more serious fellow when you're working with him in private than his public persona might lead you to believe. He's very thoughtful. He's very smart, very well informed, very political, as you might imagine. It was wonderful.
Now, here's a question also for John Bucchino. When you're working with him, and he had to convince you were really scared, you'd never done a full book musical before, he had all these Tonys, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So you're in the process of writing a musical.
Right.
You have a disagreement. How do you stand up for yourself, or do you just say, well, he's Harvey, he knows, I'm backing down?
Well, but see, he's Harvey, he knows dramaturgy, that end of things. But he's not a musician. It was actually, the writing was a very agreeable, very easy collaboration in which actually he wrote the book first, the musical, as a straight play.
Oh.
As opposed to some people think that the story is written with big holes in it where we'll put a song in here and we'll plug this big hole, this big gap with a song. Maybe some people do it that way. Harvey chose to, and it was a wonderful way to work, to write the whole thing as a straight play, which could be done without a note of music. It stood on its own. Then he said, let's each make a list of where we think, what moments we think could be sung or should be sung, because there are heightened moments where the emotions flare up and people need to sing. And we each made a separate list of where we thought those moments would be. And remarkably, our lists were almost identical. And so I took that list, we made a master list of where the songs were going to be. And Harvey had just done Hairspray, had been on Broadway as Edna in Hairspray, and had a brief hiatus, I think it was just a month or a little bit more than a month, during which he wrote the final, hour final script that I was going to work from. And then he went into Fiddler on the Roof on Broadway.
All right.
So when he went into Fiddler, he was really busy, which is great, because he left me alone. And I just took little chunks of story out and replaced those chunks with songs that captured the same part of the dramatic arc that the prose did. And then I just went through and systematically wrote the songs and fit them into the spaces where we took out the dialogue and put in songs. It was pretty methodical and not all that difficult, and there wasn't any real disagreement that I can...
Right? No, I'm not saying there had to be, or that it was a contentious thing. I'm saying in a perfect working atmosphere, when you have a disagreement, I was just wondering if you felt like the new kid who would have trouble challenging the Goliath, as it were.
Actually, that happened later on a bit with the director, and Harvey said that. He warned me. He said, look, this is ours now, but once other people, come on board, other creative people, other producers and stuff, it won't be ours. It will be theirs and ours, and they're going to have input, and you may not agree with it. And in some cases, that was true, but we worked it out.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. In general, I've had to learn how to collaborate because for so many years, I just wrote my little songs on my own and performed them myself. I had total control of my little creative world. So to open it up and let other people in was and continues to be somewhat of a challenge for me. Hi, this is New York songwriter John Bucchino, and I'm talking with Rabbi Sol Solomon on Days Gone By, UNC Radio.
Do you do scoring and arrangements?
Well, no, because, arrangements I can do on piano, but the problem is I don't read music.
Wow.
I'm self-taught. I started teaching myself how to play piano when I was 1, believe it or not, when I was a little tiny.
1? Good Lord.
Started tinkering around at 1, and by 3 I was playing little songs, and I just figured it out myself. And when I was starting to write songs, I wasn't ever writing them on paper. I would just record them or remember them. My fingers remember things, and I never thought anybody else would be performing them. I wanted to be a singer-songwriter. I thought I was going to be singing them, so there was no need to ever write them out. Then, of course, with theater and with even songbooks, because I have
me ask you, John Bucchino, you've had the Broadway show, you've had the off-Broadway shows, you've got the albums, the songbooks, etc., but how do you make a living? Do you still live in New York, by the way?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. So how do you endure the expense and everything of living in New York?
Yep.
Where's your income from? Is it residuals from Catered Affair? Is it...
No, I've actually not made any residuals because Catered Affair was what's called the stock and amateur rights. Once the show left, closed on Broadway, then luckily the Rodgers and Hammerstein organization, and not just because they represent me, but because they believe in the show, bought what's called the stock and amateur rights, which means when other theaters around the world want to do the show, they license it through the Rodgers and Hammerstein company. They gave us an advance. When they purchase those rights, they give you an advance, and that needs to be recouped before you make any more money.
Oh, before royalties.
There haven't been enough productions to recoup the advance yet. So no, I don't get any. It's still a struggle, actually, to survive. And
well, you don't wait tables. What do you do?
I don't wait tables, although I've come close to having to do that. But one of the godsends has been, for the last 21 years, I've been playing piano weekdays, every weekday from 11:45 to 1:45 in lobbies of New York office buildings. There's a company, a German company, I believe, called Paramount, that has like 7 or 8 office buildings in New York, and in each one they have a Steinway grand piano in the lobby, and at lunchtime they hire pianists to play. And I have been doing that, and it pays my rent.
Mazel.
Yeah, and it's only a couple hours out of the day, but it doesn't pay the other bills. So the other bills, I have played for various singers, most notably a singer named Holly Near, who was a political...
Oh, she's been around for 30, 40 years, Holly Near.
Well, I've been her pianist for the last 29 years.
Wow.
So that has been very helpful, and she's been great to work with. And I've done concerts more recently, over the last maybe 12 or 15 years. I started doing master classes because I have 2 songbooks out in the world. A lot of musical theater students around the world, it's extraordinary, have been studying the songs in the songbooks and use them to practice their craft and learn their craft. Teachers assign them my songs. So I have been going to these colleges and coaching the students on performance of my songs. And then sometimes I play the songs with them myself, which they get a kick out of. Sometimes I stay for a couple of days and then we do a concert together with me accompanying them and them singing my songs.
But I have to ask, you play in the office buildings, you accompany these people. No. Didn't you say you don't read music?
No.
What do you play? How do you...
I know probably 6 hours worth of standards and things, and so I just play out of my head. I just play whatever.
Oh, man, so you're not turning pages. There's nothing in front of you. You're just hands on the keyboard and boom.
Yeah, sure.
But when you're doing master classes with these students also, it's only your songs?
So I only work on my songs, yeah. So it's my favorite thing to do, actually. I love it more than anything. If I could just do that full time, I would be very, very happy. So if anybody's listening and wants to have me come do a master class, just go to my website, www.johnbucchino.com, and contact me, and I will come.
Oh, we should have been pushing that more. I apologize for not telling you.
No, that's quite all right.
John?
So anyway, it's been quite a ride, and I just want to get in one other thing. I did one other musical after Catered Affair. I got a commission from a Danish producer, and this was just random and weird and wonderful, because I was running out of money, because whatever little money I made from a Catered Affair, and it wasn't all that much, was running out, and I thought, well, now, what am I going to do? As if an answer to my question, I got an email from a Danish producer who wanted to commission me, and commission is truly the most beautiful word in English, commission me to write a musical, a Danish musical.
Wait, in Danish?
Well, it was ultimately translated into Danish, but...
I mean, I can have a cruller, but a Danish would be very difficult.
Very good.
Thank you.
We wrote it in English, because they all speak English anyway, and we met for breakfast. He was coming to New York. We met for breakfast, and actually Stephen Schwartz had done a project in Denmark, and had recommended me to this guy. Met him and said he's a really good guy. You should have breakfast with him. So he was telling me about. It was based on a Danish novel from 1913, and it took place in the actual town where he was the artistic director of these little theaters and blah, blah, blah. And I just kept saying, how much money? Because he offered me an unfathomable amount of money to do this. And I was like, sure, I'll do it. Yeah, whatever it is, I have no choice. I have to do it. The extraordinary part of it is it's been the most joyful, beautiful, easy collaboration with everybody involved. It's just been a joyful, joyful experience. And we had our production. The show is called Esaura, E-S-A-U-R-A, and it's, I think, the most beautiful thing I've ever done.
Oh.
So proud of it. And we had a full production. They hired a Broadway director, Susan Schulman, who directed The Secret Garden.
Yeah.
She came over to direct. A Broadway orchestrator, Bruce Coughlin, who's just brilliant, Tony Award-winning, came over and he did the orchestrations, and I'd worked with him before. And it was fantastic.
Is there any future life predicted?
Oh, we're hoping so.
Okay.
We have the original English version, of course, and we would love to have productions in the United States and even in the UK. And we have a beautiful full-length DVD, like multi-camera, it looks like PBS or something, DVD of the Danish production that is gorgeous with English subtitles. If anybody's interested in doing a production of the show, we've got that. So we're starting to show it around. It's only been a few months since the production in Denmark, so we're just getting started with that. But I wanted to mention it.
Of course. And before we get to the new CD also, are there any other musical theater-related projects or other projects, period, that you're working on?
I did a solo piano album. Well, I have on the website. There are other CDs. There's a musical review, actually, that I did in 2004 with Daisy Prince, Hal Prince's daughter, who directed it and co-conceived it and put it together. A musical review called It's Only Life, which is actually became a CD and a songbook.
Oh, good.
And so that was an amazing project. And then I did a solo piano recording because I am a pianist, and people had been urging me for years to do a piano recording, and I couldn't think of anything to do. And I sort of take the piano playing for granted because it's just, I've done it all my life. But I had this idea because I know a fellow named Adam Gettle who happens to...
Well, from the Rodgers and Hammerstein org, literally, from their genes, yeah.
Richard Rodgers' grandson and a brilliant writer himself, light in the piazza, Tony Award-winning genius. But he's a good friend, and he happens to own his grandfather, Richard Rodgers' piano. He happens to have it in a room, or it did at the time, in his great Soho apartment with a recording studio. So I asked him if I could use the piano, and that's what I did. I recorded improvisations on Richard Rodgers' song on Richard Rodgers' piano, which is what the album is called. I'm very proud of that. It's out of print right now. I have to, when I go back to New York, I'm currently in Tucson visiting my mom, but as soon as I get back, I'm going to get more printed up and it'll be available again.
Well, actually, I might as well ask, since we're sort of on this subject. Yeah. We just lost a week ago Mary Rodgers.
Yeah.
Did you know her? Did you,
yes,
any
I did.
memories?
In fact, I lived about a block and a half from her, and we would have dinner on occasion. The last time I had dinner with her and her wonderful husband, Hank, was about a year ago, or a little less than a year ago, shortly before Hank died, actually. We went to a really bad movie, which they kept apologizing for taking me to, and then we went back to their amazing apartment and had pork chops, as I remember. Forgive me for that, but...
It's all right. Occasionally I sneak one.
Yeah,
day after Yom Kippur, I have to.
And just had a wonderful time. She was an amazing, I'm sure there's been many testimonials written. She's an extraordinary, brilliant, funny, brash, gutsy, feisty woman who I was honored to know even a little bit.
Is there a particular anecdote you remember about her?
Not especially. No, I mean, the last time I was with her, she was talking about getting old. And she said, well, look at this. And she lifted up her leg and she pulled up her pant leg, and there were like liver spots on her leg, and she was showing me that. I mean, she was not a vain person. She was a real
front yet. Oh, well, good for her.
But anyway, I did the Richard Rodgers CD.
Yeah.
And I've recently done another piano CD of Beatles songs. Sadly, not on John Lennon's piano or something, but...
Right, oh, yeah, that's still available somewhere in that apartment.
I think George Michael owns the white one from Imagine.
No!
I think I've heard that, but I could be wrong. But anyway, it's just Beatles songs, and I have to mix it and put that out, but that's an upcoming project.
The David Campbell CD, it is called, well, wait, it'll come to me. Oh, yes, David Campbell sings John Bucchino. You couldn't think of a title? You couldn't think of something beyond that?
Well, we wanted to get both of our names in it so that people knew, what it was, because there are certain people that would know my work, but maybe not know David, although he has sung my songs, so they probably know him. And there are probably many more people who, especially in Australia, he's very famous there, who know David, and he know his name, but don't know who I am and don't know my work. So we just wanted to put it out. It seemed like the best way to go,
The choice of which songs to do, it was mutual? He said, well, my voice sounds better on these, or what?
Yeah, it was pretty mutual. I mean, there were certain songs that we had performed already, and we knew there was going to be a limited amount of time to do this, to record, to put it all together. So we wanted to have at least certain things that we were already familiar with, which we did. And then there were some newer songs, some songs we'd never done, that he loved of mine. He's very familiar with my stuff. So I just let him pick whatever he wanted to sing. It was a great representation of my work over the years, and I'm really proud of it.
Now, I think in a previous interview elsewhere, you mentioned that your favorite song of your own is Unexpressed.
It is.
Is it still? Is it why that one and blah, blah, blah?
It still is. It's the weird thing about that song is I had written it. It's the only time I've ever remember this happening. I wrote it, and I thought, well, nah, I don't like it very much, and I just put it away and forgot about it for about a year. When I was moving to New York, actually, I was going through some lyric notebooks, and I found that lyric, and I thought, how did this thing go? Luckily, I remembered the music, because I do, and I kind of thought, well, I don't know why I didn't like that. That's pretty good. And I kept playing it over and over again in subsequent months, and I kind of fell utterly in love with it. It is still my favorite. There's kind of a runner-up, though, that's song. It's a few years old, called Learn How to Say Goodbye, and it's on the new album. It's the first time it's been recorded, and it's way up there. It might be my second favorite. I'm really proud of it.
And do you have the usual songwriter thing where there are certain numbers that you knock off in about half an hour, and they just come to you and they're done, and then there's others that you work, you get a verse, then a year later you look at it, you add another thing, then 3 years later you finish it?
I get impatient, usually not that long. There's only one song that I can think of that spanned a number of years that I wrote part of, and then I couldn't finish it, and then I wrote the rest of it, and nobody's heard that one. So usually they come within a day or two, or a couple of hours, or somewhere between a couple of hours and a couple of days.
I know you tend not to get too personal. You're very private about certain things, even growing up in LA and et cetera and so forth. But I believe you are out. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but it was a thing for you to do that because early in another interview, you mentioned that, like that early album, Grateful, and your early songs, you were kind of being personal, but you were always throwing it onto like an impersonal pronoun. And you were kind of writing about yourself. But,
the way it's interesting what we do to keep our privacy or whatever, certainly what I did specifically to keep my sexuality hidden was I didn't use pronouns. I just didn't I was like you or they or we or I, whatever, but I didn't use he or she unless it was a story song about somebody else. But the songs, the love songs that I wrote, and in a way, it's actually served me because now those songs can be sung by anybody of either any sex or sexual persuasion, and it doesn't matter because they're open, and that's kind of cool.
Okay, and now you are comfortably open, and I mean, you grew up in L.A. and moved to New York. It's not like you were in the middle of Waxahachie, Texas, or Mississippi. Why was it so difficult to...
Well, because I was growing up in the late 60s and early 70s, and I didn't know anybody who was gay. It wasn't until I was
So yeah,
it was fine. I had long-term relationships with several women, and it was fine. It was okay. I knew it wasn't who I was, but I could be that, and it was nice. I liked the connection. I liked the emotional connection. But then I moved up to Venice, California, and it was in the 70s when everybody was roller skating on the beach, and it was all kind of free love and whatever, and did the disco era, and I started meeting all these gay people. One of them was a doctor, and one of them was...
Oh, a doctor!
And one of them, a doctor, and one of them, I wasn't dating them, but they became friends of mine. One worked for the phone company, one was a nurse, one, whatever, and I started seeing what it meant to be gay, and what the fact that these were just regular guys who just happened to be gay, and it sort of gave me the first inkling that it was okay to just be who I was. It was fantastic. It was wonderful. It was liberating.
So are you now currently in a relationship?
I'm not. No, I am.
Oh.
I am and have been for a long time single.
Is it tough to meet people?
No, it's just, I don't know. I guess as one gets older, one gets more discriminating and less desirable. So it's a bad combination.
And you get set in your ways. Kind of like my prostate. You just...
Exactly.
Well, before we let John Bucchino go, and I sure hope you meet that special someone if you're meant to. If not, go have fun.
All right.
Play around a little if you want to.
Not so much. I tend to be monogamous.
Oh, all right. Well, you're monogamous with your piano. We have two pianos, one for each hand.
Fine. What can I tell you?
But I forgot to ask about one other collaboration thing that just boggles the mind, that you worked on a children's musical.
Oh, there's that.
There's that with...
Well, with Julie Andrews.
Yes, with Julie Andrews.
I mean, first of all, however lovingly and however wonderful you and your listeners might think that she would be,
yes,
multiply that by 1,000,000. Close to how wonderful she truly is. The most loving, down-to-earth, gracious, generous, kind, warm person you can ever meet. I adore her. I worship at her feet. I am so honored to be her friend. Working with her on both projects, actually, she turned my song Grateful. She and her daughter Emma turned the song into a children's book. Now, they just took the lyric of the song, and then we went through a bunch of possible illustrators and found someone to illustrate the song, just the lyrics. It is such a beautiful book, and then it comes with a CD of Art Garfunkel singing the song, which I asked him if he would do it, and he did. It's an absolutely beautiful thing, which, by the way, is also available on my website.
JohnBucchino.com. And now you forced me to ask the other question. What's Art Garfunkel really like?
A brilliant, sensitive, brilliant, really. He's one of the smartest people, and also one of the most sensitive. He is truly an artist, and kind of a Renaissance man. He writes poetry. He actually has written songs himself, which are very, very good. Just a thoughtful, kind, sensitive fellow whose voice still is from heaven.
Well,
I'm sorry if you
throats.
want me to say bad things about some of these people, but...
No, I'm not looking for
I know, but
yeah.
I mean, they are... It's funny, some of the biggest people, you meet them, or that I've met, they are the kindest, they are the most generous, they are... Because they don't have to prove anything, you know. They're comfortable in their own skin and their own accomplishments, and they can reach down and support other people.
But I had read months ago that Art Garfunkel was undergoing some throat, was it cancer or trouble? Is he okay?
Yeah, he is okay. He went through a period where he lost his voice. And for a while he couldn't even speak. I mean, he really totally lost his voice, and they didn't know what it was. Now there's tragedy, right? But now, I had dinner with him a few months ago, and it's back. He's doing little intimate concerts with, I think he said, just a guitar player around the New York area in smaller venues where he's singing and reading his poetry, and it's just like an evening with Art Garfunkel, which I bet is wonderful.
I'm sure. And it has been, by the way, wonderful chatting with John Bucchino. I want to remind everybody to go to both his website, johnbucchino.com, Bucchino, johnbucchino.com. You can also go to David Campbell's website. He's the guy who sings the songs of John Bucchino in an album called David Campbell Sings John Bucchino from Social Family Records out in Australia, davidcampbell.com.
Right. And the CD is available here in the States, certainly on iTunes is probably the best way to get it. One other thing I didn't mention, we also did a DVD of David Campbell Sings John Bucchino and a bunch of other songs, because of course we could fit more into a concert than we could on the CD. I'm singing a couple, David's doing other songs besides all of the songs on the CD in a DVD that I think will be out in the fall. So be on the lookout for that as well.
We will, and if you'll keep us posted here in the neighborhood, we will tell our listeners too. So be sure to keep in touch, and we'll keep it mutual like that.
Thank you. You're a wonderful interviewer and a really, really fun person to talk with. Thank you.
Well, my last question for you is, if we were to pick a song that we haven't played already from the new CD, what should we go out with?
Maybe my other favorite. Maybe Learn How to Say Goodbye.
Oh, perfect.
Which is perfect for goodbye, right? Or if not, I mean, any of them. I love them all, and you can't go wrong. There's Sweet Dreams, which Barbara Cook and Judy Collins have recorded. There's Grateful, which Michael Feinstein and Art Garfunkel have recorded, in addition to David, and you can hear his version of that. Any one of the songs would be a good choice. So you listen and pick whichever one you like.
I love that idea. I thank you, and I will teach you, John Bucchino, how to say goodbye. In Hebrew, it's Shalom.